I recently received some questions on a video I uploaded regarding whether to and how to time align spot mics. So I thought I'd take the opportunity today to create a video showing how I time align spot mics and talk about some of the pitfalls and what you want to do possibly and what you want to avoid. I don't want to go as far as to say you ought to time align. If you spend any time on professional audio forums and research this topic, you will see a lot of discussion about it, and it seems to me people split right down the middle, where a lot of seemingly very experienced and knowledgeable engineers say, I never time align spot mics. And conversely, I see quite a few people that seem to be experienced and knowledgeable saying they do time align spot mics. First of all, I want to say that I'm talking about recording an ensemble like an orchestra and time aligning the spot mic for a soloist or a section. I'm not talking, for example, about miking a drum kit, which is a little bit different. But if you think about the simplest way, rather, to record an orchestra in any given space would be a single stereo pair to record the orchestra. And if you can find, the right placement of that pair and the right mics, then that is the simplest way you can do it. But even with that really simple arrangement, you have dozens of interrelated variables. You have the distance of the mics from the orchestra, and you have the reverberance of the room, which are very tightly related. You also have the polar pattern of your mics, which is again related to the reverberance and the overall balance of the orchestra. You have the width and depth of the orchestra. You have the height of your microphones, and that greatly affects the mix of the front versus the rear of the orchestra and the depth. You have, again, the polar patterns, angle, and spacing of your stereo mics. So you have dozens of variables that, as I said, are all interrelated. As soon as one of them changes, as soon as you have to move your mics back, your stereo recording angle then needs to probably change. So therefore, you're going to change your mic angle or spacing. So it's really a complex thing to record an ensemble. If you introduce one more microphone to that as a spot mic, you are adding a bunch more variables there, which all affect each other, but you're also adding the possibility to introduce a comb filtering into left or right channels or both. And you have the potential to negatively impact the stereo imaging of the rest of your orchestra. So you're taking something that was already complex and making it more complex. So with all of these variables, hundreds of variables at that point, it's fairly complex. And when you're listening to the effects of what you're trying to do, you have to listen not only to the effects it has on your solo instrument or section, but the way it affects the rest of the ensemble. So in my experience so far, I'm kind of split. I'm not sure that it's necessary on a lot of recordings, but what I want to do today is to show you my procedure and dispel a couple of the myths I think that surround this, and also to talk about some advice I've seen given. And that's one of the reasons I want to make this. I've seen some strange advice given in audio forums, and it's possible these people knew what they were doing, but they didn't explain it very well, so it could easily take an uninformed person down the wrong road. So let's go look at some data. Luckily, although I have a couple tables here just for reference, we won't need to use any math. I'm using those just to support my my graphs here. So I think I mentioned this earlier. I'm talking about recording an ensemble in stereo and spot mics related to that. So here we have an orchestra of guitars, because that's the only instrument I have. And so this diagram is not to scale, obviously. These mics are way too large, but this represents 4 mics that might be in a stereo array that I've used. You could just have 2 mics, you might have 4. Regardless, these are the stereo mains. And this is a single spot mic covering a single instrument. So these circumstances might vary slightly, but this is a basic diagram. So when I was a kid, I really liked story problems in math, and I was the only kid in class who liked them, I think. And the reason I liked them was that if you understand how to translate the words into equations, the equations were usually among the simplest we did in math. And I think that doing something like time alignment is very similar in that I hear people talking about how to do it, and they don't explicitly say what they're trying to do. So, and I have to back up and say that I lied earlier when I said I'm going to time align mics. You don't time align mics. That's kind of an elliptical expression because you're leaving a couple actors out there. So what you're wanting to do actually is to time align the representation of a single sound source into a spot mic versus that same sound source hitting either your main pair or a single mic of your stereo array. So in that instance, then it's when this soloist makes a sound on his instrument, it hits the spot mic, and that's a certain distance, and we know that time travels approximately 1125 feet per second. So at, say, 1 foot, it takes about less than 1 millisecond for that sound to hit the spot mic. But if the mains are about 15 feet away, it takes maybe about 13 milliseconds. So I don't know what I just said there, 1 millisecond or 13. So the difference between the two is 12 milliseconds. So when you see these channels in your DAW, you're going to see probably about 12 milliseconds between where it hits this mic versus where it hits this mic. And so the theory of time alignment is that you would move the spot mic forward in time, you'd delay it, so that the sound from this source hits the timeline of the spot mic at the exact same time it hits the stereo pairs. So that's, again, once you state it explicitly, then trying to time align it is a lot simpler because you know that you need to put a sound source wherever this instrument is. And I use like a dog training clicker, and I just make a sound right here where this soloist would be and record it into all my mics. And then when I go into the DAW, I can move the spot mic track, the clips, forward in time to make them match and time align. So I saw somebody give advice one time that he had several spot mics, and instead of putting a clicker where the sources were, he put them in front of the stereo pair. So let's just say we put it here. And at first I thought it was an epiphany. It's like, wow, that's so much simpler because you just need to click once and then you have them in all of your spot mics. But unfortunately, this doesn't this doesn't measure the right thing unless you know exactly what you're doing. So it might go immediately into here. The difference is going to be maybe the difference in distance between these two. But we don't actually care about the distance between the mics, because what if the mics are set up a little more like this? It's not the difference. It's not the distance between the two mics. It's the difference in distance between the source and this mic and the source and that mic. So he might well have known how to do it this way, but for the uninitiated, if you're going to move your tracks to make the clicks align, you're actually moving your you're going to be moving your spot mic in the wrong direction. So you're going to make it even earlier. So all right, so that covers that. Let me think what else I need to talk about here. There's another, I don't want to call it myth, but I've heard people misspeaking when they talk about this. They talk about phase aligning. So let's talk for a minute about phase. We are not trying to phase align. We're just trying to align the timing of a sound source hitting the mics. So here is a series. Here are 3 sine waves put together on the same, and here is a duplicate of the exact same thing. So anytime we have a note played on any instrument, it is a combination of frequencies based on overtones and whatever else. And if it's a piano, it could be multiple notes with multiple overtones. And the eventual wave would actually be the sum of all of these, but this is just to show that it's made up of component frequencies, and they have different wavelengths. We know the wavelengths because we know how fast sound travels. So 200 hertz wavelength is 5.5 feet, or 67.5 inches. But up at 4K, a wavelength is 0.28 feet or 3.3 inches. So I hope my math is all right here. Somebody will correct me if it's not. But that's really different. And if we look at the half wavelength of 4K, it's just barely over 1.5 inches. So if our goal is to phase align this, if we don't get exactly right, we're not going to be phase aligning anything. So if you look at, if we get kind of close, and none of this is really to scale, but if we just look at the effect we're having on the longest, lowest sine wave here, it's matched up pretty well to its counterpart. But if you look at higher frequencies, they're not matched up. In fact, this guy is now directly 180 degrees out of phase. So all other things equal, which of course they never are, but this frequency would actually null out. So this low frequency would be boosted and this high frequency would be attenuated. So that is a comb filter if it's all in the same channel. So regardless, you're never going to get this kind of accuracy out of that because the soloist is going to move. It's just not going to happen. So that's not our goal. We're just trying to time align such that they do not sound ahead of the other things by 20 milliseconds or whatever the difference might be. So, what else can I talk about here? I think that's pretty much it. I want to go now over to my recording. So this was a recording where I had several different spot mics, but those were for different pieces. The piece that I'm going to play for you today just had one single soloist with a stereo pair of spot mics. So in this track listing, we have an A-B pair, which is a spaced pair of omnis. Then we have another stereo pair, which I mentioned over here, which is the cardioids in the middle. So that is a near coincident pair of cardioids. So those are our two stereo mains. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm only going to listen to and deal with the cardioids right now, because that's enough. And then this, again, is the stereo spot mic on the guitar. And the orange down here is, I duplicated this spot mic exactly. So this is an exact same as the yellow. And this is so I can A-B it later. But it's also to prove a couple different things here. If I mute everything but the solo and I turn the orange out of phase, then when I play here, oops, it's not playing. Is it playing? Yeah, it's playing. Okay. You hear nothing because these are exact duplicates and because the phase is reversed, or polarity is reversed. That's the rehearsal. So yeah, just to show that these do null. So they are exact duplicates. So enough of those. Let's leave them out. So one of the pitfalls I ran into was that I did not ask everybody to be quiet while I was doing this clicking. It was between the rehearsal and the performance, so it was relatively quiet, but there were still people talking and there was like somebody playing a harp. So what I found was it was actually a little bit harder to see and hear the clicks in the stereo pairs than I wanted. So let me go find a couple of these clicks. So as I mentioned, I had quite a few solo mics. This is solo 2, that's down at the bottom down here, the gray. The next is the piano. So you'll notice piano 2, there's that click. The problem is that while this is easy to see and hear in this channel, it's actually really difficult to find in the omnis or the cardioids. So again, it's because of the reverberance of the room, the distance from the mics, and the fact that people were making noise that I cannot really see them very well or hear them. You can hear them, but it's slight. So you don't see much in the amplitude, but you do see the frequencies here. So this, I believe, is the beginning of the first click in the cardioids. So luckily, we're just going to deal with the guitar tonight. That is easier because the guitar was closer. Okay, so again, we are now at the guitar click. So now we can back up the numbers that we saw. The guitar was roughly, I don't know, 10 feet away from the stereo mains. So given how closely mic'd he was, I expect to see about 9 or 10 milliseconds. So here is where the click, the distance from where the click happens in the solo track versus the first omni. And we can see that is 9 milliseconds. So that's exactly what I'm expecting to see. Another thing that you can see here is what I mentioned earlier. When you're spaced pair, you can see that it hits each of these mics in a stereo rate at a different time. It reaches the left omni first, which is up here, and then the left cardioid, then the right cardioid, and then the right omni. And if you just look at the distance between, or the time between the two omnis, you can see 1 millisecond. That's not accurate enough to tell, but that's roughly a foot apart. And that's what we expect to see. So, another potential pitfall here, which I didn't think about until after I mixed this, was so we're relying on these clicks, which are going to be fairly accurate, at least as a really good starting point. But what happens if somebody, when you don't know it, moves this spot mic just a little bit? A few inches, it's going to It's going to change your timing. What if the soloist moves his seat forward or backward after you do your click? Well, your clicks are only a starting point. Everything else is up to your ears. So these are all approximations. And the final pitfall I'll talk about here is really more about usage of your DAW. What I thought, and I'm going to go to this exact marker right here. Let's see, what do I have? Okay, so I have all of this. Hang on a second here. Let's go ahead and go back to what we were doing earlier, which is, oops, I don't know what's happening here. There we go. So we still have both versions of the spot mic, live and polarity reversed. So if I play here, you'll hear nothing. Exactly as we expected. Now what happens if I move this track trying to time align it, and I say, wait a minute, did I really want to do that? Let me move it back all the way to the beginning. Now I'll hit play. Suddenly, you hear noise here where you shouldn't. If these polarities are reversed, then we shouldn't hear anything here. The problem is that I had snap on, and while I thought I went all the way back to the beginning, it actually snapped to something a millisecond off. So turning snap back off and then moving it to the beginning. Now if I hit play, nothing. So it's kind of a scary thing here, and it only serves to point out that when you're moving things in your timeline, you need to be careful. You could negatively affect your mix and just not even know it, and it's why you need to rely on your ears. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the alignment then. I said I was going to align to the left cardioid. Let's just use that as a starting point here. So I'm going to grab this guy and just move it roughly like this. Zoom all the way in, and it's pretty close. Because of how different the wave looks in the more distant stereo pair versus up close, it's really hard to align them perfectly. But we're within, what, microseconds at this point? So we're pretty darn close. Okay, before we listen to this, I wanted to talk about one more thing here, and that is, again, if you go to audio forums and see the justification that people give for not time aligning, part of that is that if you're trying to time align the spot mic, you are changing the timing of the spot mic channel. So obviously the goal is that you're going to move the representation of this sound source in that channel forward in time so it matches. But when you change that, all of these other instruments are also probably entering this mic to some degree, and that's called spill. And if the spill is significant, which, you know, if you're miking a whole section, it probably is significant, you're also changing the time alignment of the rest of the orchestra as it enters this mic. So, honestly, that's so complex, I'm not even sure how you would analyze that, but suffice it to say, it's going to change the sound of the orchestra. So you need to listen to both. And so when you A/B and say, have I made a positive difference by time aligning these versus not, you need to listen to your soloist or the section that you're spot miking, and you need to listen to the difference in the entire orchestra. Is it better? Is it worse? So, all right, enough caveats. Let's go listen to a little bit of music. That's the last piece here. So now you can see that this piece, oh no, I'm still not at the end. Let's see here. There we go. So you can see that this piece starts with, let's see here, the soloist. So I'm going to play just the, let's play just the spot mic by itself. So it's this channel. So the way these stereo spots are panned, the guitarist was pretty much stage left. So I have the left channel hard left, and then I have the other one just slightly left. So this is what the solo spots sound like by themselves. Okay, let's talk for a second about the trade-off here. I had this guitarist mic'd fairly closely, and I did that because the orchestra was fairly loud compared to the acoustic guitar, and so I wanted to control spill. If I had it to do over again, I think I might move his spot mics back a bit, but by controlling the spill, I was able to time align without affecting the orchestra as much, hopefully, but at the cost of miking him in a slightly unnatural way. He's just a bit too closely mic'd. So, and let's listen to the cardioids now. Can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but all of these are pretty much as they were recorded the day of. There's no processing. I've only panned them and adjusted their relative levels a little bit. No other processing. So it's way before a rough mix. This is literally just matching a couple levels and hitting play. But one thing you can hear there is that the guitarist is not represented in the main mix much. In the omnis, he was even less present. But the interesting thing here is when I talked about how closely mic'd the guitarist was, to avoid spill, that helps not affect the rest of the orchestra too much if I do time align. But conversely, if the soloist doesn't make it much at all into the main mix, then is time alignment even necessary? Because what are you aligning with? So, well, you're aligning with the rest of the orchestra, I guess, but you're not time aligning that soloist with his own representation in the mix. So you could actually argue that if you get a soloist who's that far down in the main mix, you might not even need to time align. But I don't know. There's so many variables there that's almost too hard to think about without hurting my brain. So let's next I have a couple scenes set here. So I have the first scene, and I'll play the beginning of the piece again. I'll play the first scene, which is the cardioids plus the time-aligned stereo spots. And then I'll A-B between that and the second scene, which is the cardioids once again, with the guitar original not time-aligned. So let's listen to that as I A-B it. Okay, so I'll leave it up to you. Do you think that time aligning helped at all? I don't think it affected the orchestra too much. I'm leaning a little bit in favor of time aligning with respect to its effect on the soloist. I think it sounds a little better. It's kind of hard for me to A-B this for you because if you were wanting to do it, you'd probably do it at a different interval and different places there. But as an outro to this video, I think I'll play just a little bit more of the piece. Again, A-Bing between the two.